As more and more people make their way into our room, I would like to welcome everyone again. People are still joining, but also we have a full program, so I think I'm going to start. So hello and welcome everyone to the first SASI lunch break. You might feel like you're in the same place around the same time like last month, but it also somehow feels a little bit different. And that's because it used to be the INA lunch breaks, but then now have become the SASI lunch breaks. After many, many successful editions before, we are now the SASI. SASI stands for Sustainable Agricultural Supply Chains Initiative, and it pretty much represents what the INA used to be, but also it is all new, it is all English, and it is more powerful. In a few seconds, Lisa Kierfel-Rühle from the BMZ is going to tell you more about what marks this transition and what the SASI is all about. But for now, just note there's a new name, a new brand, new colors, but I am still here as usual to guide you through the session. My name is Annette Ciroli-Harms from the Conpolicy Institute for Consumer Policy, and as usual, I'll be here to present you the agenda and moderate the questions and answers. So speaking of the SASI, the role of the SASI is like the role of the INA. It's about bringing companies from different parts of the supply chain together and to promote cross-sectoral partnerships. One main tool they use to do this is the Due Diligence Fund. And the Due Diligence Fund really stands at the core of today's lunch break. So what is on our agenda today? I will shortly hand over to Lisa Kierfel-Rühle from the BMZ for opening remarks, telling us again about the transition from INA to SASI. We will then hear a presentation on the Due Diligence Fund and especially on the lessons learned in previous editions of the fund. That presentation is going to be followed by a more practical presentation by Better Cotton, who are going to tell us very specifically about the learnings in their two specific projects. After both of these presentations, you in the audience are going to get a chance to ask questions as usual via our chat function. And finally, you get an outlook onto the Due Diligence Fund's third call for proposals, which is currently ongoing. And just as usual, we will close off just before 1 p.m. with a summary and outlook. Today's session is recorded, so in case you have colleagues who are unable to join, you can also find the recording later on. But now, without any further delay, I would like to welcome Lisa Kierfel-Rühle from the BMZ for her opening remarks.
Thank you, Annette, for your kind introduction. So, hello to everyone. Again, on behalf of the German Ministry of Economic Development and Cooperation, the BMZ, it is a great pleasure to welcome all of you to today's very first SASI lunch break. I'm Deputy Head of Division here, the Agriculture Unit. Yes, after 32 INA lunch breaks, we are carrying forward this format, now under the name of the newly formed Sustainable Agriculture Supply Chains Initiative. In short, SASI. SASI builds on and combines the expertise and resources of pre-existing projects implemented by TSZ on behalf of BMZ, working together towards green, fair, and inclusive global agriculture supply. Many of you took part at the SASI meeting, and it was a great pleasure to meet many of you in Berlin some weeks ago. So even though SASI itself is new, with the lunch break series practical pathways to achieve due diligence, we are following a well-established and trusted format. On the first Friday of every month, we present you various practice-oriented tools and guidelines, demonstrating that the implementation of corporate due diligence is feasible for everyone. In today's lunch break, we are going to present you lessons learned from the Due Diligence Fund, which so far has supported 13 innovative projects in 8 different agriculture sectors worldwide. And this Due Diligence Fund has been established as a support measure by BMZ for the implementation of due diligence legislation both in Germany and the EU, such as the German act on supply chain due diligence, the Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz, the EU regulation for deforestation-free products, EUDR, and the recently adopted EU directive on corporate sustainability due diligence, the CSDDD. While BMZ regards due diligence legislation as a milestone for more sustainability in agriculture supply chain, because it's creating a level playing field in the EU and it's turning respect for human rights and the sustainable use of natural resources into competitive advantage, we know, of course, that getting ready for EDI and CSDD poses a challenge for many actors. This is why we have expanded our support measures, including the recently started third round of competition for the due diligence fund. But today we want to take a look back at the 13 projects that the DDF already has supported and at the lessons learned resulting from their practical implementation. We hope that this can be beneficial for you, your own due diligence in research. And we are especially pleased that Better Cotton will be sharing their learnings from the DDF project on first mile traceability in the cotton sector. These projects highlight the critical importance of transparency in the global supply chains as a prerequisite for any further engagement. So I'm looking forward to today's inputs and hope that we will have a fruitful event. Thanks so much, and back to Annette.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for your introduction and also once again saying what the new SASI is all about. All right, so we've heard it already. Today is all about the Due Diligence Fund. I already know what the Due Diligence Fund is all about. We've also covered it in previous lunch breaks, and we are going to post links to the recordings of these previous lunch breaks, so you can read about them or rather listen to those sessions once again if you're interested. But I also want to know if you know already what the DDF is about and what's your experience with it. So you should be seeing shortly a polling question where you can say where you're at in terms of the Due Diligence Fund. Do you know what it's about? Have you used it? So please give us your vote and then we can see what's your experience all about it. But it doesn't really matter what your vote is going to be like. I think after today, we're all going to be on the same page, knowing what the DDF is about. And to really start doing that, I would like to welcome our first speaker, Ms. Hannah Kedner from the GIZ. She has been working for the Initiative for Sustainable Agricultural Supply Chains for almost 3 years. Since her start, she's part of the team that has developed and implemented the Due Diligence Fund. She studied and worked on international relations and development in Germany, Brazil, Ecuador, Bolivia, and Italy. And she focused her master thesis on rights holder engagement within corporate due diligence and worked also in the civil society sector. So Hannah, please enlighten us with what the due diligence is about, because there are quite a few people who want to use it and who've used it and loved it, but there's also quite a few people who still think the DDF. What is that? Is that just a strange abbreviation? So I hope after your presentation it's going to be clearer. So Hannah, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Annette, and hello to everybody. It is a big pleasure to be here today and to present you some of our lessons learned of our previous projects. It is nice to hear that for many of you, the Due Diligence Fund is already familiar. And in that case, you might also know that we are currently having a third open call for proposals. About that, we will talk in the end of this lunch break. But now I would like to take a look back at those projects that we have implemented already and the learnings that we have from them. And so for my presentation, I will focus on some more of the overarching learnings. And then I'm also very happy to have Better Cotton with us that can give you some more technical insights on their own implementation. For all those who don't know the Due Diligence Fund yet or that haven't been familiar with it yet, let me just give you a brief summary what it is. So the DDF has been commissioned by BMZ first in 2022 And since then, we have had 2 calls for proposals, out of which we have funded a total of 13 pilot projects. With all of these projects, we are aiming at the support of the fulfillment of corporate human rights and environmental due diligence in agricultural supply chains, while focusing on the benefits for the primary producers and the environment in the producing countries. Our strategy to do so is to pilot these promising, innovative, and in many cases sector-wide project ideas, and by accompanying them and then deriving lessons learned, our goal is to get out some good practices, adaptable instruments and methods, which are not only useful for the individual projects themselves, but also that can be shared beyond with the sector, and that other companies and institutions can also benefit from our learnings. And so for this, we are aiming to disseminate learnings in formats just like today, but also in further communication materials that we are currently preparing. For example, there is a brochure to be published for which you can stay tuned with all of our learnings. And so let me dive in and share some of them with you today. Before diving in, I wanted to give you a quick overview of the projects that we funded so far. You can see here it has been very diverse. We've been happy to have such diverse projects also. They have been implemented across 3 continents in a total of 8 different commodities, if you count botanicals as a group. Otherwise, it would be many more. And we have tackled topics such as the different due diligence steps, but also our SASI key topics such as deforestation-free supply chains, living income and wages, and so on. So I don't want to get into much detail on this. The point that I want to make is that our projects have been very diverse, but nevertheless, there have been quite some common learnings which we have seen in many of them, despite the diversity, and that we think can be important for all of your due diligence endeavors in which you are. So let me start with the first one, and it can be nicely summarized as well begun is half done. And that to start your project, a robust risk assessment is really a good key to start a project, and then derive the measures and the activities that you have from your prior risk assessment that can help you to increase effectiveness, to prioritize and have tailored measures, and to anticipate challenges to implementation that can also arise. So it is smart to take some time on your risk assessment and do a good one, and to not rush things through. Our second learning, and excuse the proverbs, but it is very fitting, we thought to describe it, is that none of us is as smart as all of us, and that collaboration and engagement with your supply chain partners, so both with sector peers, but also with your suppliers on the ground in your sourcing countries, can create significant efficiency and be beneficial for you, working together with third-party organizations, and also, of course, with your own target group, which can increase sustainability, effectiveness, ownership. There's a lot to comment about this, and we've seen it in a lot of examples that it is very beneficial. And then last but not least, I will give you a third proverb, is that slow and steady wins the race. And we've seen that patience pays off. And in pilot projects, which you might do in the beginning of your due diligence, just as we did with the DDF, they remain a pilot. So sometimes it works well, sometimes you have to make adjustments, and it is not possible to do due diligence overnight. So it is part of a continuous learning, and it makes sense to sometimes pause, adjust, and then keep going. And to do this in a good way, long-term engagement with your partners helps you a lot to lower friction costs, to build trust and ownership with your supply chain partners, which then in the end also help you in being more efficient. So unfortunately, this lunch break only is 1 hour long, and we don't have time to look into all of these in more detail. But if I have to pick one of them that I would like to talk a bit more about, then it is the point of collaboration and engagement. There have been many examples where we've seen how beneficial it is, and we have, while this is non-exhaustive, we have categorized them in 3 different types of stakeholders that are very relevant to engage with. So to start with your supply chain partners, as just mentioned, it is important to have those strong partners on the ground, because in the end, they are also the ones that you have to work together with to implement your due diligence. So let it be that you need informations from your partners for your risk assessment, for supplier self-assessments maybe. It can be that you need their collaboration to implement certain mitigation measures, maybe awareness or safety trainings. And also you need their collaboration to implement a grievance mechanism where the workers that should use it also do not face any harm or fear in using it. So for all of this, you need strong partners on the ground that you can trust, that you can work with mutual respect, and that is something that you can gain through long-term engagement. And this can be a prerequisite for all those sensitive risks and transformative measures that you might need to implement. As a second type of partners for collaboration and engagement are third-party organizations. And this is something that we have asked from all those partnerships that have already teamed up for the due diligence fund, that have already implemented projects. So to partner with what we called public benefit partner. So standard organizations, NGOs, community-based organizations, which can support you with an independent perspective, with wide networks, context-specific expertise, and thus help you to facilitate things. And just to name 2 examples how this can facilitate you of 2 of our projects. For example, we had 1 project or 2 with the Union for Ethical Biotrade, which have provided a risk database which can be accessed by multiple companies, where they can upload their risk assessments and then also benefit from the risks assessments of others. Or also using a traceability solution by working together with Better Cotton, which is something that you will hear more about in just a moment. And last but not least, and it might even sound a bit banal, but I think it is very important to highlight as well, is the collaboration with so-called rights holders. So with those who are the ones actually or potentially affected by the adverse impacts in your supply chain. So you can say your target group. And working together with those people that are affected by the adverse impacts can be a huge advantage and play a key role in, for example, prioritizing the right risks, in identifying risks which are difficult to see from the outside. Also by tailoring the measures to the actual needs, and to also find out or put attention on non-intended effects, which might also be difficult to see from outside. So security issues, for example, so that are also important to keep in mind. So consultation with rights holders, or even better collaboration with them together on your projects, can deeply increase effectiveness and sustainability of due diligence implementation. And all of these types of collaboration and engagement can really help you with getting the certain context sensitivity that you need to make your due diligence endeavor also a success in a sustainable way. So I would have quite some more examples to talk about, but this is the moment where I would like to leave the floor to Better Cotton and to provide us with their technical examples of their 2 projects. For me now, I would like to just ask you, if you're interested in hearing more about our learnings, that you stay tuned for our brochure on further lessons learned, which we will release soon. And if you are interested to hear more, we're happy to engage in discussions, so you can just hit us up. And for now, from my side, I want to thank you and hand back over to you, Annette.
Thank you very much, Hannah. So I'm sure our vote would have changed by now. I'm sure everyone is now more aware of what the Due Diligence Fund, the DDF, stands for. You've already mentioned it. We have two representatives of Better Cotton here, and we're going to see Hannah a little later for our question and answer. I would like to welcome Himaya Patel and George Cox from Better Cotton. Himaya is the first mile traceability coordinator at Better Cotton, and she has been working at the London-based organization for just over 2 years. Prior to this, she worked on traceability and certifications in the cocoa value chain in Uganda. And George instead is first mile traceability manager at Better Cotton. He's responsible for setting first mile strategy alongside the global teams based in London and Geneva. They both work very closely with the teams in India and Pakistan, and they're going to present us more about it. So, Himaya and George, the floor is yours. George, we don't see you yet, but now we do. All right. Brilliant. Tell us more about your presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. We're delighted to be here today to talk about our first mile traceability pilot projects in India and Pakistan and talk through our learnings and recommendations. Next slide, please. The agenda for today, we'll start by giving an overview of the cotton supply chain in India and Pakistan, along with some of the challenges posed for first mile traceability. Himaya will then talk us through the details of the Due Diligence Fund funded projects, and we'll discuss some of the learnings we gained through our rollout of the interventions. We'll then look at some of the broad recommendations that we would make to anyone delivering similar projects. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about how we are applying our learnings moving forward. And hopefully we'll have time for questions at the end. Next slide, please. Great. So let's start by having a brief look at the cotton sector in India and Pakistan. There are several key challenges related to the cotton supply chain in India and Pakistan. These are 4 characteristics we have observed which all present challenges for first mile traceability. Firstly, the sector is highly dependent on smallholder cotton farmers. Better Cotton works with over 1 million smallholder farmers across India and Pakistan, and smallholders account for more than 95% of the Better Cotton volume produced in the region. These smallholder farms are often remotely located and geographically dispersed. In terms of first mile traceability, this creates significant challenges in identifying the actors and monitoring the first mile of the supply chain. Secondly, there are many informal actors who operate in the supply chain. More than 80% of the cotton sold by smallholder farmers in India and Pakistan is sold through intermediaries such as middlemen, commission agents and marketplaces. These intermediaries are often hard to identify and operate in an informal way. This creates challenges in ensuring the segregation of better cotton from conventional cotton, and it also creates challenges in compliance with our chain of custody requirements. There are also low levels of digitalisation in the supply chain, especially in the first mile. In a smallholder context, there is a limited availability and access to technology and varying levels of digital literacy at farm level. As a result, record keeping is largely maintained in a physical format, and the paper trails can be difficult to maintain and monitor. Finally, there is little integration of the smallholder farmers with the downstream supply chain actors. Farmers don't tend to use the same systems as the rest of the supply chain, and therefore retailers and brands and other downstream actors do not have visibility of the source of their cotton. Likewise, smallholder farmers have little or no visibility or awareness of where their cotton goes after their immediate buyer. Next slide, please. So before we dive into the details of the pilot and the learnings gained, let's have a quick look at what we mean by first mile traceability and some of the actors and processes in the first mile of the cotton supply chain. Firstly, what does first mile traceability refer to in the cotton supply chain? First mile traceability covers the way in which the cotton is segregated, traded, transported and traced from the farm to the gin. the gin being the point at which the raw cotton is first processed. There are a number of ways in which the harvested cotton makes its way to the gin. In the simplest case, and this is the most common for large farms, this would be directly from the farmer to the ginner. However, in smallholder contexts, cotton often passes through intermediaries, which can exist in various forms, either in a formal way or an informal way. These intermediaries play a critical role in India and Pakistan. This slide that we're looking at here uses India for an example, where we can identify at least 5 different ways in which the raw cotton seed is sold, including through commission agents. These are actors who lend money to farmers during the off-season so that they can buy the seeds and other inputs. The cotton is then sold back to the commission agents in order to recover this debt. The cotton may be sold to grain markets, which are permanent market structures which buy and sell a range of commodities throughout the year. The cotton may go through independent middlemen who provide a trading link between farmers and ginners. It may go through brokers or agents who act on behalf of the farmers and negotiate a price with the ginners. And then there's the direct to the gin route, which in itself can take various forms. For example, the farmer may have their own vehicle and deliver the cotton to the gin, although this is rare. The ginner staff may go directly to the farm and negotiate a sale, or the ginner may employ agents to buy on their behalf at a set price, and then they also arrange transport. So, as you can see, it's quite a complex process with lots of potential channels. And to add further complexity to this, the cotton may be stored for some time at any part of this process if the seller wants to wait for the market price to improve. With that, I will hand over to Humaya.
Thanks, George. So now I'm going to just go on and talk a little bit about the pilot projects that we managed to conduct in both India and Pakistan, thanks to the DDF funding, the first and second round of the funding. So this is just an overview of the 2 pilot projects that took place over the past 2 years. One took place in Gujarat and Maharashtra in India, and the other one was in Punjab and Sindh in Pakistan. In these projects, we included stakeholders across the first mile of the supply chain. So we included farmers, middlemen, and ginners, and to kind of identify them, we mapped the first mile of the supply chain in each of these regions to understand the connectivity between the farms and the ginners. There were 4 key goals and objectives to the projects we conducted. Firstly, building engagement with informal actors at the start of the supply chain. Through this project, we really wanted to kind of establish and strengthen the relationships between Better Cotton and also between the actors at the beginning of the supply chain to enhance their visibility into the wider supply chain and kind of what kind of traceability initiatives and regulations are out there. These actors are obviously really important to engage because they play a really crucial role in sourcing the better cotton, as well as providing essential services to farmers and other informal actors. So enhancing engagement at the start, as Hannah kind of mentioned earlier, really allows for better collaboration throughout the project and understanding their needs. We also wanted to understand how receptive these actors were to using digital tools for first mile traceability, to assess kind of their willingness to adopt any digital technologies. Digital tools can be quite key in streamlining any first mile processes and improving transparency and efficiency in the transactions between the farm and the gin. So it's key for us to kind of understand any barriers to adoption that might have been there, such as digital literacy challenges or access to technology. Another objective of these pilots was understanding the first mile of the supply chain. It's very dynamic, so we wanted to identify the roles of the actors, as well as any challenges and solutions to first mile traceability there. The last goal was to explore alternative purchase mechanisms. Before or currently there's kind of quite informal paper-based systems in place, so we wanted to explore digital purchase, transaction and integrity measures, so new approaches to the procurement of cotton to reduce any risk in the first mile traceability there. So to achieve these objectives, we conducted kind of 4 key activities. The main activity was introducing digital and paper-based tools for farmers, middlemen and ginners to log their transactions. We delivered slightly different approaches in both pilots. In India, it was the middlemen and gins that used the mobile tool to log the purchases. This was decided because not all farmers kind of had access to a smartphone for a digital tool. In Pakistan, lead farmers were responsible for purchases, so a lead farmer was responsible for the purchases of about 15 farmers. In addition to the digital tool, we also set up kind of verification mechanisms. So we set up automated telephone verifications in India, where a farmer received a phone call for each log transaction and had to either approve or reject that transaction. We also conducted a research piece in India to identify key stakeholders in the first mile, understand any challenges and opportunities faced by them, as well as to understand all the nuances between regions. Because one key thing we found through this pilot is there's a lot of diversity within countries, within states, and between states as well. In Pakistan, one of the activities we did was engaging these informal intermediaries and middlemen through participatory workshops. Again, this links back to one of the learnings Hannah mentioned earlier. We gave the intermediaries the opportunity to really share what they saw their role in the supply chain was. They're willing to participate in first mile traceability and any obstacles they thought they might face in any mechanisms we were introducing. So I'll just quickly run through here the project achievements against the main indicators. In Pakistan, middlemen, 87.5% of middlemen reported seeing a marked benefit in engaging more formally with Better Cotton. And in India, we engaged 800 farmers, 12 intermediaries and 6 ginners. And these actors were all trained on broader first mile traceability, reasons for implementing first mile traceability, including kind of regulatory landscapes and demand from retailers and brands. And they were also trained on digital tools and mobile verifications here as well. So I'm quickly going to go through the overall project achievements. By successfully engaging with informal actors, by tracking transactions and gaining a deeper understanding of the supply chain, this project kind of made progress towards strengthening first mile traceability. Through both of these pilot supply chain actors recorded seed cotton sales and transactions, both digitally and physically. In India, as I mentioned, there was also a verification process to kind of strengthen the accuracy and the authenticity of these transactions. We did find that not all participants actually entered all of these transactions digitally, but it showed a proof of concept that digital transactions can offer a step in the right direction. Secondly, we really involved all the stakeholders through participatory workshops, group training sessions, and one-to-one follow-ups to engage with these farmers, intermediaries, and gins. This engagement was quite a key step because until this project at Better Cotton, we hadn't formally engaged with these intermediaries that operate between the farm and the gin. So that was quite a big step for us in this project. Also, as George mentioned on one of the earlier slides with the big diagram, the first mile of the supply chain is very complex. So understanding the dynamics, we got to understand the dynamics of the supply chain a bit more through this pilot, and that's something we're also going to continue to build on in the future too. So the key learning, I would say, like the main takeaway is the importance of understanding the needs and the concerns of supply chain actors, and a really strong business case is needed to encourage these stakeholders to participate and to follow any introduction of first mile traceability requirements. I think by addressing what their needs are and also being clear about what benefits are involved to those involved, that would really help to encourage the adoption of any first mile traceability mechanisms and ultimately to scale that. So this is just some feedback we received from pilot participants. The first one is gins asked if they could have kind of Excel CSV downloads of their purchase records. And this was shared because also gins, as well as doing the digital transactions, they were probably doing some of the other record keeping that they were doing in the past as well. So this highlights the need for kind of data accessibility among stakeholders and the need to not duplicate efforts in terms of record keeping and transactions. Some supply chain actors also stated that a digital tool offered them increased visibility into other supply chain actors, which can improve market access for farmers, intermediaries and ginners, and also traceability by indicating which actors are eligible to buy and sell Better Cotton. The third comment here highlights the need to kind of articulate and define any benefits of using a tool for actors. First mile traceability can help farmers and intermediaries with market access and regulations, but I think clearly outlining this to the stakeholders as well and kind of creating mutual understanding of what the benefits and incentives are for them is very key. So I'm going to go through some kind of broader learnings from these projects. The first learning would be that there is an appetite for first mile traceability. Participants overall did have an appetite for it and were receptive to pilot interventions. Building awareness and sensitization, again, as Hannah mentioned earlier, it takes time. So this was a first step in the right direction, but further support is required from us and kind of from downstream supply chain actors to really embed these systems in the first mile. Another learning is that the supply chain is dynamic, so defining a set of participants was a bit of a challenge for us due to the dynamic nature of the first mile of the cotton trade. So when conducting projects like these, it's really important to map the supply chain from farmer to ginner, so understand which gins a farmer is selling to, but also to look at it from the other end, so look at a ginner and understand what their buying pools are to make sure that all informal actors, intermediaries, and even farmers are kind of fully captured in the process, but also, remain flexible and adaptable throughout the process and kind of include additional pilot participants if they're mapped at a later stage. A participatory approach to pilot design is also key. So involving all stakeholders from the very start in the design and the implementation of the projects. I would recommend kind of begin by building engagement with them, particularly the informal ones, like I mentioned, the middlemen that we hadn't formally engaged with before. I think it was really useful to have a preliminary engagement with them before suggesting and implementing any pilot changes. It helped us kind of increase trust with the middlemen and also improved our understanding of the local context to implement more effective solutions. In terms of the validation of transactions, so we involved both buyers and sellers in entering and validating transactions. This was beneficial as it gives both parties kind of a sense of ownership over their transaction reporting, and it's not just relying on data provided by one actor about another actor. An iterative approach was also really important and a good learning from this project too. So continuous learning and improvement throughout the project to adapt to the changing circumstances and the dynamic supply chain. As a result of this, we also made sure to kind of maintain engagement throughout the season. So conducting follow-up sessions with participants to ensure any project changes were clearly communicated, as well as just providing hands-on support to things like the technology tools and any mechanisms they were doing. A last learning was gender norms. So gender norms can have an impact on the supply chain dynamics. We found that female participants weren't really comfortable to attend mixed gender training sessions. This was in India. So we set up female-only training sessions and found that kind of the females were more receptive to attending and also to participating and being a bit more kind of open about their views in these sessions. So I'm just going to summarise some key technical learnings that we got from the pilot project. I think these highlight the potential of technology to improve supply chain transparency in the first mile. But I think these projects also emphasise the need for kind of careful planning and training and a lot of ongoing support to these first mile actors to ensure that implementation of the tool and adoption of the tool is successful. So the first learning here is that participants are receptive to using technology in the field. Some of them stated it provided a lot more visibility to market as well. So they were enthusiastic about using it and felt empowered by using a tool to record their transactions. A significant amount of hand-holding was needed for some participants, particularly if you look at kind of scaling up a tool amongst actors that might have slightly lower levels of digital literacy too. So it was really important in this project for us to provide ongoing assistance and troubleshooting as well. As the potential suggestion we got was to develop user manuals or training videos to kind of support these participants throughout the pilot. The tech tool should also be dynamic to fit in with the dynamic nature of the supply chain, so to allow kind of changes to the inputs and localizing the tool to improve the user experience and engagement. And the last point I'll touch on quickly is network availability. So reliable internet connectivity for data collection and synchronization of data is really important. So we used a tool that had an option for offline data collection, and then data synchronization took place when there was access to internet. Thank you. With that, I'll hand over to George quickly to just summarise the recommendations and how we're applying these learnings moving forward.
Great. Yeah, we can have a quick look at our recommendations and how we're applying the learnings to this harvest season. I appreciate we're probably quite tight on time, and we can go into these in a bit more detail in the questions. But yeah, so to quickly summarise our recommendations for anyone who might be conducting a similar pilot, we would recommend having an in-depth understanding of the landscape to ensure there's minimal change or disruption. We found that if we're asking too much of people, for example, like asking to change the market dynamics and ask farmers to sell directly to a gin, that's an unreasonable ask. We have to operate within the framework of the current market dynamics. We also found that having strong pre-pilot engagement with participants was absolutely key. We had most success with in cooperation from gins who were closest to better cotton and understood the drivers of the pilot project. We would recommend staying in touch with pilot participants throughout the interventions, just to let them know that the pilot was being closely managed and monitored. This was quite a key one, so making participation optional was potentially something that was a bit of an oversight from our side. We allowed the gins to choose whether to adopt the new processes, and as a result, several of the gins did not end up participating to the level that we'd hoped. As much as possible, we would recommend making participation in the pilot mandatory. So once the participants have been selected, make it clear that these are the processes they have to follow, and make sure that there's a way of checking that mandatory participation is adhered to. And finally, prior to starting to any project like this, I would strongly recommend that you ensure that the data on which your project relies is accurate. Our response rate was reduced due to incorrect contact information for farmers, so we weren't able to validate as many transactions as we would have liked. Next slide. And again, we can elaborate on these in the question time, but how are we applying our learnings moving forward? So this harvest season, we're continuing to pilot first mile traceability interventions whilst taking the learnings from the DDF-funded projects discussed. Firstly, we're validating contact information. So as I mentioned, that was one of the issues with the previous pilot. As part of our farm data digitalization work, we're using digital data collection methods to reduce errors in our farm data collection. In terms of farmer yield information, we're looking at polygon mapping and satellite imagery to improve accuracy. We're using the yield data in combination with the reported purchases from the gins to add a layer of automated validation to those cotton sales. We're also working to understand the optimum timescales for validations and data entry. Part of the lower than expected response rate may have been that we were not attempting to validate the transactions at the right time. We're considering trialling immediate validations at the point of sale to see if we get a better response. We're expanding across different contexts. We're running a pilot in Turkey to understand the first mile traceability challenge in different contexts. And one of the learnings that came out of the pilots is that we have to understand and engage better with intermediaries, as this stakeholder group has been largely overlooked. That was one of the objectives of this pilot, but again, I think we still need to build on this, because the more we learn about the complexity of this intermediary landscape, the more we realise we have to really get under the bonnet of it. And finally, possibly, and Himaya mentioned this, and possibly the biggest single takeaway from these pilots has been that the farmers and the intermediaries will change their processes to strengthen first mile traceability, but there has to be a clear business case for them. Without a business case, it will be very hard to achieve large-scale adoption of new practices. With this in mind, we're doing a piece of research this year alongside focus groups and workshops in farming communities to understand what that business case may look like and explore the benefits, costs and opportunities of applying these changes in the first mile of the cotton supply chain. That's it from us.
Right.
Questions?
Yes, I think there are so many questions already. I'm going to try to prioritize them a little bit. I mean, your presentation was very insightful, so thank you very much to both of you for joining us today. You can read the questions in the chat, and please feel free to post more questions, although we do have just quite limited time. I think the first two questions were about sort of moving from paper-based systems to digital systems, what were the main challenges and how did you make people engage? I think, Himaya, that question was actually asked as you were answering and talking to these points. So I would sort of deprioritize that one, as well as the key drivers to achievement. You have sort of covered that afterwards in quite some detail. But maybe a question, you've touched upon it, George, how you're going to continue the project. How are you going to continue funding the system in the future? Maybe just a short remark on that one first.
Well, we're very interested in ensuring that the funding for the project comes from the end of the supply chain, comes from the retailers and the brands who are interested in sourcing better cotton and sourcing and knowing the origin of it down to a farm level. So they will be paying a premium for the better cotton, and that money will be channeled into funding the first mile traceability projects.
Right, and you've also mentioned that there has been some pushback by stakeholders. How did you go about that, sort of to make sure you get everyone involved? And just by the sheer numbers, engaging with all of these people must have been a big challenge. So how did you really go about it? And do you have any sort of key learnings about that to share?
Are you happy to take that one, Maya?
Yeah, sure, I can take that. So I think during the kind of, as I mentioned, we tried to engage stakeholders before the project began and kind of set the scene a little more, particularly with the informal stakeholders. And these were kind of the middlemen we were working with. Pre-project were ones that we, had selected based on their access to technology and things. So they were kind of more willing to participate. In terms of pushback from the stakeholders, I think a lot of it was not necessarily pushback to the project itself, but just having to change, having to change their systems and things. So I think, training, and as George said, a business case for them as well, kind of implying that there will be benefits for them in the future. And I think because this was optional pilot, the kind of data entry was optional because they were using their other data entry systems at the time. That was some of the reason that they were less receptive to entering the data that we were asking them to.
And probably a related question, can you elaborate on why some of the intermediaries are interested in participating and contributing to transparency? Is it only the business case, or are there other points you would mention on this?
So I think part of it is that they were kind of interested in using a tool and things like that, but they wanted to see more of a business case for it as well. Some of the key things they cited were just, I think, feeling a bit more included in a slightly formalized system as well, and feeling more involved in the supply chain itself. We were offering training and things like that, training on the digital tool, which I think can kind of be used by them in other contexts of their life and kind of other businesses they're participating into. And also visibility into the supply chain actors. So technically a tool like this could in future kind of let them know which farmers and which gins they're eligible to trade better cotton with, and they might not have been aware of all these kind of actors in the system. So they're the few benefits they can offer to the intermediaries.
Right. And then speaking of the validation of baseline data that you said was really, really important, how did you carry that out? Did you use third-party agents? And were there some challenges in doing that? And how did the validation improve credibility of the system?
So in terms of the validation of data, that's more something that we're planning to move towards in the coming season. And one thing that we were validating was the transactions. So that was automated phone calls to the farmers in India. And as George mentioned, one of the challenges was that some of the phone numbers were not connecting. So it's the validation of the transactions that a farmer was approving or rejecting, whether that transaction took place. And then in the coming season, in the coming year or two, that's when we're going to start trying to validate that baseline data more, so projects like this in the future can be more successful.
And that was just to add to that, that was one of the key learnings as well, that our data is not as good as it needs to be, particularly with contact information for farmers, because it seems that farmers change phone numbers quite a lot. There's a culture of whatever phone operators offering the best deal, people are quite likely to switch numbers. So we need to have a mechanism to be able to keep our farmer information up to date and gather those data points regularly, rather than just getting it once and assuming that it's going to remain constant.
And maybe just the last point, I mean, these practicalities, I'm sure they're not specific to cotton, but they will be sort of first mile issues on many other types of products as well. But how would you summarize it? How did the complexity of the supply chain influence accuracy of that data? Any ideas on sort of that complexity? I mean, I've just been impressed by the sheer numbers of sort of how many cotton farmers come onto how many intermediaries and then sort of end up in just a few number of ginners. But is there anything else you would say that sort of caused complexity of the supply chain in that regard and sort of impacted the data?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the scale of the Better Cotton operation in India and Pakistan is huge. As I said, there's over 1 million farmers, so it is very difficult to maintain the accuracy of that data, and particularly given this added complexity of the intermediaries being quite transient and informal, and they don't necessarily operate every season with the same gin. So, what we actually want to do here is, and we're doing a piece of work this season, as I said in how we're applying these learnings, is to really, really understand that intermediary landscape and have a look at which ones of those intermediaries, I went through those 5 groups of intermediaries, which of those groups are suitable for formal onboarding onto the Better Cotton chain of custody. So which of those groups of intermediaries are reliable and operate in a formal enough manner that we can confidently onboard them onto the chain of custody and hopefully bring them in closer to the organisation rather than them operating outside of our chain of custody requirements.
Brilliant. So thanks, Imaya. Thanks, George, for your insight. I think you've really brought to life what Hannah spoke about earlier, establishing long-term relationships and really doing your risk assessments and really looking at all the different areas of your project, of your supply chain. And with that, I would like to thank you guys for being here, for sharing your insights. And I would like to welcome Hannah back to present us a little bit more about the future of the Due Diligence Fund. And maybe you can also just sort of, knowing what we've just learned from Better Cotton, is there something that's common to DDF projects, a common challenge or a common takeaway that you would want to give anyone else engaging in that endeavor? So with that, Hannah, please take us through it.
Thank you very much. Yes, so I think the last point mentioned by George also summarized it very well. It is common to any due diligence endeavor that there will be practicalities on the ground, challenges arising. So it makes sense, a part of taking time to really get on the ground yourselves, to get to know your partners, to get to know, I see some error message here, to get to know who you can work with and then engage in that long-term trustful relationships with them. So I think that counts for any type of due diligence endeavor. Since I'm seeing that the presentation is not working well, let me try.
It's working for us. So we are on the first slide with what we offer and what we're looking for.
Okay, and now it's also working for me. Okay, time is running, so you've heard already what the Due Diligence Fund is. We are currently having another round open for you to apply with your project idea, which we can fund for up to 18 months and with a sum between 50,000 euros and 123,000 euros. And we offer you guidance throughout the project development and implementation, so you can always contact us already with your idea before formally applying. And what we are looking for are project ideas which you might have an idea of now that foster the implementation of HREDD. And we're looking for partnerships between European companies and their supply chain partners or third-party organizations, so public benefit partners. So collaboration has been kind of the topic of today, so we're looking for partnerships like that as well. And for an own contribution of 50% of the project volume given by the European company with discounts for smaller companies. the projects that we are looking for, as mentioned, they follow a due diligence logic. They have measures on the ground with those directly affected, and they can cover either central due diligence processes or also our. Sorry, I'm on the next slide. I will just take over the control. Now you should also see the second slide. So it's based on a risk analysis, measures on the ground, and can cover due diligence processes or our cross-sectional topics. You have now until the 20th of December to hand in your short proposal to us, so which is more of a concept note, giving us a general idea of your project idea and of your partnership, which we then will check for eligibility and shortlist those most promising ones, which then have the chance later to work on their project proposal and then hand it in to us again for final evaluation, which will then be done by the end of April. We are also planning a next call for proposal, probably around May next year. So if this timeline is now very tight for you, there will be also another round of call for proposal where you can also then apply. So if you are interested, don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We have Q&A sessions on next Monday and Tuesday. You can just send us an email if you would like to participate. There we can cover everything in more detail again and are open for any of your questions. And then also just check our website for the application documents, the terms and conditions, and contact us in case of any questions. And we are very much looking forward to your applications.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Hannah. Thanks, George and Himaya, once again. You've given us so much content, so much food for thought and ideas for future collaborations. Thanks a lot. Time is running. We did have a very tight schedule. So without any further ado, I would like to hand over to Charlotte Häusler-Wager, who is team leader at the SASI, for some closing remarks and a summary and outlook. Charlotte.
Yeah, let me start saying thank you especially to Himaya and George for sharing your insights and learnings on the Better Cotton Traceability project. I think your first-hand experience provided us really with a clear and practical look at how due diligence can be successfully implemented on the ground. And I'd also like to thank our colleague Hannah Kettner for sharing overarching learnings of the Due Diligence Fund, which has more than highlighted the importance of collaboration and engagement to achieve effective due diligence. We hope that these insights have been inspiring for all of those of you who are facing similar challenges. And I'd also like to thank Annette for your great moderation of today's lunch break. So finally, I'd like to thank all participants for joining our first SASI lunch break and making this format such an inspiring get-together. I think that your active participation, your thoughtful questions, and your contributions have greatly enriched today's discussion. Together, we are more impactful in shaping global agricultural supply chains and joining forces to achieve sustainability at all levels. So before we wrap up, I'd like to invite you to join us for our next SASI lunch break, which will take place on Friday, December 6th. And we'll share the topic soon, so please stay tuned. On behalf of the SASI team, thank you once again to our speakers and participants. We are glad that all of you were here and participated with your questions and remarks. Together, we are making great strides towards more green, fair, and inclusive global agricultural supply chains. We're looking forward to receiving your applications for the Due Diligence Fund and to meeting you again in our next lunch break in December. See you there. Bye-bye.